Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the world of immune supplements. You see them everywhere, right? All of them promising to supercharge your defenses. But are they really all the same? Well, we're going to put one of the most popular ingredients out there, beta-glucan, under the microscope and see what the science actually has to say.
Think about it. They come from all these different sources, they have wildly different price tags, and they all make some pretty big claims. But when it comes down to actually supporting your immune system, does the brand on the bottle really matter? Well, it turns out the science suggests it matters a whole lot more than you might think. Let's get into it. All right, first things first. What even is beta-glucan? Well, you can kind of think of it like a personal trainer for your immune system. Scientists have this fancy term for it, a biological response modifier, which is really just a way of saying it doesn't fight bad guys directly. Instead, it gets your own immune cells prepped, alert, and ready for action.
Now, if we zoom in to the molecular level, beta-glucan is basically a special type of fiber. It's a sugar compound, and it's found in the cell walls of certain plants and fungi. And here's the cool part. Our bodies can't digest it, but that's the whole point. Our immune cells actually have these little receptors on them that are perfectly shaped to grab onto beta-glucan's unique structure. It's like a key fitting into a lock that tells our immune system, okay, time to switch into high gear.
And you can find this stuff in a surprising number of places. We're talking the cell walls of baker's yeast, all sorts of medicinal mushrooms, the fiber in your oatmeal, and even in certain kinds of algae and bacteria. And as we're about to find out, where it comes from is a big part of the story, just maybe not in the way you'd expect. So here's where things get a little tricky. If you decide to go and research beta-glucan yourself, you probably won't find a nice, clear answer. What you're going to find is, well, it's a wall of scientific noise. And I'm not exaggerating here, there are over 50,000 scientific papers published on beta-glucan. It is easily one of the most studied natural compounds on the entire planet. You'd think that would make things clearer, but all that information hasn't really translated into clarity for us, the people actually using it. Yeah, with all that research, you'd think we'd have a perfect picture, right? But here's the twist. Even the top scientists in the field admit the findings are kinda all over the map. One study will show this incredible, powerful effect, and the next one will show almost nothing. And the reason for all this confusion is actually pretty simple, but it's really profound. Not all beta-glucans are the same. So, how in the world do we cut through this confusion? Well, the only real way is to look at direct, head-to-head comparative studies. Where different products are put through the exact same tests under the exact same conditions. It's like a scientific showdown. Okay, now before we get to the really juicy results, we have to put a big pin in this. It is absolutely crucial to understand where this data comes from. The studies we're looking at are what's called preclinical research. That means they were done in the lab, using cell cultures or in animal models, like mice. This is a totally standard first step in science. You have to figure out if something works on a basic biological level before you even think about testing it in humans. So while these results are incredibly revealing, just remember, they're from lab studies, not human trials. So how do scientists actually measure an immune response in the lab? Well, they look at a few key metrics. The first one is called phagocytosis, which is just a fancy science word for how well an immune cell can literally gobble up an invader. They also measure signaling chemicals like interleukin-2, which is basically the immune system's general alarm bell. And finally, they check on antibody production, which is how our bodies build up a memory and a long-term defense. And this is where it gets really interesting. When you take all these different commercial beta-glucan products from all those different sources and you line them up side by side using these exact same tests, the results are, well, they're pretty dramatic. Just take a look at this table. It's measuring that IL-2 production, the alarm bell, from mouse spleen cells. And wow, at the very top, you've got this one, Glucan #300, clocking in at nearly 1,000 units. Then you see some other well-known brands like Wellmune and Maitake Gold showing pretty strong activity, but lower. But then look at the bottom. Products like Epicor and Solgar, they barely even moved the needle in this specific test. The difference in performance is just huge. And this bar chart makes that difference crystal clear. Just look at the top performer, Glucan #300, compared to Solgar way down at the bottom. We're talking more than 10 times the immune response in this particular lab test. They're both sold as beta-glucan, right? But their performance in the lab couldn't be more different. So what does this all mean? Well, it points to one huge takeaway. It's a total myth that the source, whether it comes from yeast or a mushroom or an oat, is what determines how good it is. The research shows again and again that the source itself isn't the most important factor. So if it's not the source, then what is it? The science consistently points to two things: purity and structure. Think of it this way: how much of what's actually in that capsule is the active beta-glucan, and how much is just other stuff? And maybe even more important, did the delicate molecular structure that your immune cells need to recognize survive the manufacturing process? That's what really makes all the difference.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. How can you, the person actually buying this stuff, use this information to make a smarter choice?
I absolutely love this analogy from one of the leading researchers in this field. He says all these products might be called beta-glucan, just like a Ferrari and a Yugo are both called cars, but you would never expect them to perform the same. And the science shows you shouldn't expect all beta-glucans to perform the same either.
So what should you be looking for? Well, first, stop worrying about whether it's from yeast or mushrooms. That's not the main story. Instead, look for companies that can give you hard data on purity and on the percentage of those active 1,3/1,6 linkages. Find a brand that backs up its claims with real, solid, scientific data, ideally comparative data like we've been looking at. And please remember, a higher price tag absolutely does not guarantee higher activity.
And that kind of leaves us with one final, big question to chew on. We've just seen how two bottles, both labeled beta-glucan, can have a more than 10-fold difference in biological activity in the lab. So if that's true, what other assumptions are we making about the supplements we take every day? What else in your cabinet deserves a much, much closer look?